Okay, so how can one guy write a beautiful, gentle poem about the quiet countryside and also the thundering, world beating anthem of a global empire? That's what we're going to get into today as we unpack the surprising and fascinating contradictions of James Thomson, an 18th century Scottish poet who, believe it or not, mastered both.
And really, that's the big puzzle here, right? How do you square these two things? The poet of sublime, quiet landscapes on one side, and the bombastic lyricist for the British Empire on the other. Let's break it down.
So look at this. On one side, you've got The Seasons, this absolute masterpiece of nature poetry from 1730. And then, just a decade later, he co-writes Rule Britannia, a roaring anthem all about naval power and patriotism. It's this incredible range that it sets the whole scene for our story.
Here's our roadmap for exploring his world. First, we'll see how he was a poet of both nature and nation, bridging two literary eras. Then, we'll dive deep into his masterpiece, The Seasons. After that, we'll uncover the surprising story behind that famous anthem. We'll also look at his poetry's deeper purpose, and finally, wrap up with his enduring legacy.
All right, so first up, let's get our bearings. We need to place Thomson in his time. You have to understand, he wasn't just, writing poems in a vacuum. He was a truly pivotal figure, basically acting as a bridge between two completely different literary worlds.
And here's why he was such a game changer. He had one foot planted firmly in the formal, structured world of Augustan poetry. Think order, reason, and clever wit. But his other foot was stepping right into the wild, emotional landscape of the coming Romantic movement. He was the guy who really fired up poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge with his intense focus on nature and feeling.
Okay, so now let's turn to his most celebrated work, The Seasons. And I want to be clear, this wasn't just another poem. When this came out, it was an event. It was a total game changer. The Seasons is this huge, epic poem published in 4 separate parts over several years. Each section is this deep, immersive dive into a single season, and it explores not just its beauty, but its effect on the world, on animals, and on us, on human emotion. Seriously, nobody was looking at nature this way in poetry before.
So, his journey kicks off with spring.
And it's all about this explosive renewal of life after everything's been dormant in winter. And when you read his words, you can almost feel the world waking up. It's this raw, powerful energy that must have been absolutely electrifying for readers back then.
Next up, we get the blazing, overwhelming heat of summer.
And the focus shifts to the sheer vitality and abundance of nature at its absolute peak. This focus on the sublime, the almost scary power of the natural world, that was totally revolutionary stuff. Then the mood shifts a bit, it gets a little more melancholy with autumn, which zeroes in on the harvest and this feeling of completion. And this is what reveals his deeper philosophical side. This shows he wasn't just painting pretty pictures. He was thinking about these deep, fundamental cycles of life, growth, and eventually decline.
And he wraps it all up with the stark, quiet stillness of winter,
which is this really harsh, honest reflection on death and survival. But, and this is so crucial, even in the bleakest moments, he finds that quiet promise of renewal, that spring will come again. You see? It's the whole package, a complete vision of nature as this massive system, beautiful, terrifying, and perfectly ordered.
That idea of a grand, ordered system, that's actually the perfect way to pivot, because from the quiet fields and the ordered seasons, we're now heading to the crashing waves and the ordered power of the British Empire to explore Thomson's other, equally famous creation.
You know these words, right? They basically became an unofficial national anthem, this incredibly potent symbol of British identity and naval power for centuries. But where it came from? Well, that's probably not the story you're expecting.
Yeah, so Rule Britannia wasn't originally meant to be a standalone anthem at all. It was actually just one song in a type of theatrical show called a masque. And the crazy thing is, the play itself, Alfred, is pretty much forgotten today. But this one song, it just took on a life of its own and became an absolute legend. So, okay, we've got nature, we've got the nation, but Thomson was also a real thinker, a philosopher. He used his poetry not just to describe the world around him, but to really dig into these big, complex ideas about how we should live our lives.
And this is where you really see his incredible intellectual range. On the one hand, in Liberty, he's tackling these massive political themes, tracing the entire history of the fight for freedom. But then on the other hand, he gives us the Castle of Indolence, which is this beautiful, dreamlike allegory about a much more personal struggle, the moral battle between being industrious and just giving into laziness.
So what's the big takeaway here? After looking at all these different sides of his work, why does a poet from the 1700s still matter to us today?
Well, his legacy is just huge. It's immense. He practically invented nature poetry as a major literary force. He was a direct inspiration for the giants of the Romantic era who came right after him. He was that critical bridge between two ages. And, oh yeah, he also happened to write the words to one of the most famous patriotic songs in history.
And that really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Thomson's work was built on these two powerful and sometimes conflicting pillars: a deep, almost spiritual love for the natural world, and a powerful sense of national identity. The conversation he started between those two huge forces, well, it's a conversation that's still happening all around.